Hello and welcome back, everybody. Hope you've had a wonderful time in your booths, and you're now joining us for the community organising session. And we're going to have a very interesting time for the next hour. We have some terrific people to speak with. For the people who weren't with us last night and who understand the power of community, last night people were sharing stories about the campaign and the experiences they have. And a few people really struck me in some of the things that they said. And I'm going to read some of them to you. There was a young woman called Brooke from Wentworth, and her comment about the highlight of the campaigning for her was that people do care and that people feel really connected when there's a common cause. And then there was Anyo from Macalla, who said the connections were so powerful, everyday people achieve this. It is amazing, isn't it? And then young Ali from Goldstein, who said active hope. That's what it was all about in Goldstein. It fills you up. And all of those sentiments are sentiments about community and what we all experience in our hearts when actually community is there for us and when community is working. But we all know that community doesn't just happen. Community relies on lots of people and lots of people's effort and goodwill and putting in and stepping in to make it work. And so community organising is the topic of our conversation today. Probably there's lots of things that we'll talk about together. We'll probably talk about listening and how important the gift of listening is, and about bravery and courage, and about how important process is, not just the outcomes, and that community needs connecting through purpose and values. There's a whole lot of fundamental things that really will be at the bottom of this conversation today. But before we go on, I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful people who are sitting there in front of you. We've got Mark Kelly, Denis Ginnivan, Sue Freak and Sue McKinnon, and they're all waving hello. And how we're going to run this is Denis and Sue are going to run the first part of the session talking about voices groups, because as we know, the voices movement has been really fundamental, our platform behind the community independence movement. And people from all walks of life have found a place to have their voice heard through the voices groups and the voices movement, and the sort of incredible outreach that that's provided. So Denis Ginnivan, who's been involved in right at the start with Voices for Indi 10 years ago now, we're celebrating our anniversary year, and has been amazingly involved in the Voices for groups in electorates all over the country. So Denis is welcome. And Sue, very happy to have Sue here. She's joining us from the Hughes electorate. And no, sorry, not joining us from Hughes, are you? From Kooyong. Yes, and going to talk about the voices of Kooyong and what has happened there and what they're looking at in the future in terms of Kooyong. So Denis and Sue, I'm going to hand over to you, and we're looking forward to having a lovely time listening to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alana, and hi, Sue, and hi to everyone else on the panel, but also listening into this presentation. Very pleased to have you here and keen to hear the chat, see what the chat's saying, and just to be part of this whole experience. And Sue, would you like just to say good day to everybody too, please?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to be part of this conversation. It's been an amazing journey for Kooyong, and I'm really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to share it with so many people today.
Great. Thanks, Sue. I thought what I'd do is just put in some introductory sort of thoughts and ideas about how the voices movement, voices for, voices of movement has happened. Some observations about where it fits in the spectrum of community activity as we've been speaking about. And then I'll come back to you, Sue, with some specific questions about your experiences with being deeply involved in Voices of Kooyong. So broadly speaking, it seems to be a situation where voices groups sort of precede the emergence of a candidate and a campaign. They're often more organic, and I'm happy to be, I may not be 100% correct on this, but it's my observations. They're more organic in that they're just starting out. There's somebody who's made a contact via Twitter or a phone call to somebody, and there's been a reference to someone else. But it's actually where someone's wanting to do something about their politics and don't know exactly what to do or how to do it, but they cannot, to use the phrase, keep shouting at the television, and as if that's the only thing you can do if you're not happy with your political, your role as a citizen and a member of a community. So what has sort of it's led to is many people have come together and formed just a friendship or a network of other like-minded people who want to do something, and they may work towards finding a sort of a sense of common purpose. They might have seek out speakers to talk about and support ideas which can support their thinking about what they might want to do. Typically, a group may work towards forming themselves into an entity that's not just a group of people who are individuals with opinions, but rather an organisation with a position. And that, I think, is actually a really helpful thing in the step of a voices process, is to have, in effect, the entity is doing the talking and on behalf of others that have agreed that that's what they're on about, rather than it being an individual who might be very influential, and that might be the way to go for them. But when it comes to a group, forming some kind of entity where there's a sense of common purpose, common mission, and common endeavour is really what a voices group is to still find that way of doing something about one's politics. And it could be all sorts of triggers for that. And we won't go into too much detail there, but it's actually led to many groups that have started up around the country. Some proceed, maybe they might be running parallel to a campaign and a candidate, but as I said before, many start before then, and they focus more on the ways in which a community can engage and consult with and form a sense of what is it the people in our own regional, around our own federal electorate in this case, what people are thinking, what they feel strongly about, how they feel about the way in which the politics is working. Can it be done better? Some have actually moved on to writing a report or running a process called kitchen table conversations, which is something that certainly came from the Indi tradition, was to not just say, look, we think we know what's going on, but to consult much more widely and to invite people to come to respectful conversations sometimes with a lot of trepidation, because typically when people are speaking about politics, you know what's going to happen. It's all going to end in tears if there's no sort of respect and opportunity for everyone to be heard in the same way. So there's a facilitated process that can be used to, and has been used very widely, to find a way to listen to people with that respect and a sense of purpose, and that it's all going to end well. So I think Alana mentioned it earlier, we were talking about how important listening is. It may not seem like, I guess when we are talking about politics, often what happens is that someone's going off and the other person's thinking, yeah, yada, 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 yada. When's he going to stop? Yada, yada, yada. I don't want to listen to him. I just want to have my own opinion expressed. And so a facilitated process can ensure that there is an equality and a respect for each member of a group to actively listen and to deeply listen and to hear what people feel themselves when they feel safe and secure that someone's actually, a group of people are listening to them. And it's a really deep principle that the kitchen table conversation process has projected and made it, I think it's been very successful, because people will feel like they belong in some kind of political process if they get respected and listened to, and they know that, and then they in turn will respect other people's opinions as well. So there's a sense of, I actually live in a community of people who I've met. It's just not a mob of individuals who have all got their own voice to be heard. So that principle of listening and community and respect are the key principles in that. So I'll go into a bit more detail later. Well, I think with Sue too, but I was just wondering, for Voices of Kooyong, Sue, I'll ask you a few questions to sort of bring out some of the themes and the issues that might have come up for you. But what was going on in Kooyong for you? How did you see the politics of Kooyong?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, the Voices of Kooyong emerged almost kind of birthed out of what was Facebook groups that were kicked off by a number of individuals in the electorate that had a really strong kind of reaction and response to the things that were happening in Melbourne around lockdown, and our utter dismay at the behaviour and language of our federal member about the way the Victorian government was responding to COVID and the lockdowns, the economy,
yep.
Just politics in general, pretty much. So basically, out of that, there was a bit of activism, and it was formed in social media. And from that, there was sort of an activist model starting in Kooyong. But as people, there's about 35 of us that were kind of getting together on a regular basis online through COVID. We had a little break where we got to get together in person between lockdowns to talk a little bit about our purpose. But it became evident over time that the Voices of Framework was going to do, as you say, Denis, be the most effective vehicle for the engagement of the community about the things that were important to them, not necessarily just focusing on voting out the Liberal Party or the current sitting member, but actually understanding what representation would look like,
yep.
and understanding what issues are really important. And that's where Voices of Kooyong really sort of started to sort of find its feet. Had a slightly different social presence in the Facebook, Twitter sphere, Instagram. We started connecting with online events during lockdown. COVID kind of helped us a little bit in that way, because it's much easier to get people to kind of show up from their lounge room than it is to get them to actually walk out their front door and go to a physical location. We actually had, like starting something using the social tools and Zoom events was actually quite helpful in the end, because we were able to touch base with a really diverse community set. Really, it was much easier for people to access conversations with their community and find people just like them who also were interested in representation, in getting a better outcome for themselves, their families, and their community.
So what sort of things happened along the way from there? Once you sort of sensed there was a group of people, they all wanted to have a sense of, broadly speaking, a common purpose to do something. What are the sort of things, and how did you act and structure or things like that? What were the key things at that time?
Yeah. So like beyond what was outwardly facing, what was inwardly facing was the deliberate decisions to set up and incorporate an association. So you mentioned, Denis, earlier that having a structure was really important. So it wasn't just a group of us. It's like Sue Fricky says this, but no, it's actually, there are people who are taking up a role and are listening to the community and can speak on behalf of inside the structure. That also allowed us to do some simple things like some very small scale fundraising for sort of admin, but it put roles in place. We had a website set up. We have principles and values and a purpose, and a clear articulation of how we would operate and how anyone could belong to Voices of Kooyong, be part of the Voices of Kooyong, but the framework in which we operate, focusing in on things like respect and listening, integrity, evidence-based conversations, and the like. And we made a very deliberate decision that we weren't going to be a campaign. And that's definitely flavoured the way we've kind of operated during the federal election, and will certainly flavour the way we operate in the coming years.
Yeah, so you sort of leaned more towards the democracy and citizen engagement and community.
Absolutely, community.
And as I said earlier, there are some groups have leaned more towards where that all transposes into finding a candidate, or maybe the members would move from one group to a campaign later if that so emerged. But it's obviously not the case that every Voices group were involved or supported a candidate directly. Some may have, some did, sorry, and others may have been thinking about it. But so how did it go? You did those kitchen table conversations and the report?
Yeah, we did. So we had a number of events. So I think probably the first thing that we did that was an online survey, and we got about 500 participants in an online survey talking about things that were important. So it gave us a bit of a flavour, which then informed how we would communicate with newsletters and other things. So we had regular communication with the community. We did regular events such as online sort of conversations and small breakout rooms and facilitated things. We had a really well done climate event. We were fortunate to have Julia Banks come and speak to us at some point. We also had, as we got nearer and nearer to the point where the campaign was about to sort of really kind of kick off, and Kooyong Independence Group was out there doing all of the work of selecting the candidate and running all of that campaign part. We had sort of had a crossover of the baton change from Voices of Kooyong with the Kathy McGowan and Kerry O'Brien events. So
okay.
We ran a lot of events, and we did kitchen table conversations right throughout all of the August, September, October period, and produced a report.
So do you think, can I just ask, do you think the power of all of that and the influence that it had on people, but also the content of the report, it helps the way in which a community can express itself? It becomes a bit of a base for subsequent action? What are we going to do next? How are we as a community going to react to this? It seems to me to have a role in that way, and it probably sounds like a leading question. I don't mean that. It's probably more. Can you talk about how it did in Kooyong? Have that sense of we've got to take this to another level, or some further responsibility.
Yes, I think the report itself, was a cementing of what was already beginning to be like wheels in motion. So I think in terms of the first report that we've produced, I'm not entirely sure it was a catalyst in and of itself, but it certainly was a very useful tool to have deliberate conversations with potential candidates about how they would in fact represent the voices of Kooyong and the community on the basis of what was emerging from the conversations, the online survey and the KTCs. And it also is the mechanism that we can use in the future and do another round of KTCs, for example, in 12 months' time, to hear about the things that are of concern because things change and how the community feels about the representation they're getting. So it becomes a baseline document, I think, for moving forward over time, and allows us the ability to engage with the community in an ongoing way with their democratic process.
Thanks, Sue. Now, Alana, I just want to check with you how we're going for our little section now. If I step over, let me know.
You've got a few more minutes if you want to wind that up into the bigger story, Denis.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'll pass on to Mark.
Yeah, good, great. Well, thank you. Very briefly then, it's been my experience of having been working with many groups that all got what I call their own identity and autonomy, the pace, their own agreed values, and the direction in which they take things. It's their own business, and that's always been a strong kind of principle around Voices for Groups. You don't have to feel like you're part of something bigger, because you're not anyway, and many don't want to be. They just want to have a sort of sense of relationship with their own community, to be authentically, we're doing our own thing here. What they choose to do and what they may emerge into some other public set of actions, that comes later. But in the meantime, there's this sense of moving from early trepidation to a sense of transformation that could come from all of that preliminary work. So I think I'll finish up just for the moment, and I'm more than happy to talk further down the track, but I'll hand you back to Alana right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Denis and Sue. That was terrific to have an overview of the Voices for groups and to understand, the difference between them, the different things that people are doing in their electorates, the motivations being different. I think it's really good for people to actually really understand that message. There's no recipe. But of course, we know Voices for Groups is only one way of community organising, and there's been other really effective ways of community organising in this community independent space. And so, Mark, I'm going to come to you now and give you some time to talk about not only Vote Tony Out, but your sort of philosophy that underpins your notions of how community organising can happen.
Yeah, so Vote Tony Out, I think Tony Abbott was a bit of a gift for this community independence program, because he's such a divisive character. And it is interesting that since that 2016 election, I've talked to a lot of people who don't have a Tony, and there really is only one Tony Abbott. Actually, Peter Dunn's probably a bit of a Tony Abbott as well, but it's interesting. I think for me, it just starts with having a conversation, and then like you were saying before, it's just about listening and really understanding how people form their opinions, and then from there it sort of just either grows or it dies. And I think in Warringah, I think a lot of people hadn't had that conversation, but they would just get annoyed the day after the election or on election night. But I think for me, it was just sort of, okay, I've got to start doing something here. And I think after the sort of same-sex marriage plebiscite, when Tony walked out, that was the sort of straw that broke the camel's back. But I'm looking through the attendees list, and I can see a lot of people who were part of Vote Tony Out, with Colleen and Per and even Katerina, and experienced this thing, which was, it was really, I think, it's sort of, because it sort of evolved from just a conversation that started with a closed Facebook group, that I sort of was thinking about, this tribe of people that we've built, and everyone wanted, I think a tribe has to have a uniform sort of thing. And so we started selling Vote Tony Out t-shirts. And then that Christmas of 2018, the Vote Tony Out t-shirt was the thing to give people for Christmas. It was just an amazing thing. Katerina experienced going for a walk down at Balmoral with Kirsty, and just how it was sort of fun. It wasn't, we weren't sort of, it wasn't becoming part of the ETA or the IRA. It was actually just a community movement of people, and all we wanted to do was just sort of have conversations with people. But it sort of grew from there into, I think by the end of that, before sort of Zali came along, I'd sold about 6,000 t-shirts in Warringah, and I delivered the first 1,600 of them myself, because I wanted to sort of talk to people and just understand who these people were. And they weren't all left-wing radicals. They were just people like me, and there were people in Mossman, and there were people in so it was really interesting that as that grew, and I could talk to the media and I could talk to different people about what the fabric was. And the fabric was just the community. There wasn't a particular group of people who were outraged who wanted to do something. It was school teachers and mums and I don't know, it was just everyone. It was just people like us, sort of thing. So that was a really interesting thing. So as we got into the next election, 2019, I remember sitting with Anyo and Sophie down in Anyo Geddes and Sophie down in actually our showroom in Brookvale, and just talking through this sort of conversation and what they could do. And I sort of, after Tony left, Jason Filinski for me was the next biggest target, because he was such a sort of not a community representative. It was really, he was a sort of atypical party politician. So it was just great to help those guys and a lot of other electorates form a bit of a movement. And in McKellar was Rising, that actually helps build a tribe of people who are in the activist mindset in a way. So of all the Vote Tony Out people, a lot of those just move straight over to be volunteers bizarrely. And so when if in the history of independent standing, it's all about them, and then you've got to sort of tell their values. But like Sue was saying, once you get the movement going, the representative just represents that community. And in my sort of thought process all the time was, the electorate's only 100,000 people. And for me, that wasn't a lot of people. And to convince more than, 51% of them that the status quo was broken didn't seem like a hard ask. So it's not like you're trying to change the world. And so when Vote Tony Out, we didn't do Twitter because that was the big thing. I just focused totally on Baringa, and just peer-to-peer communication and active listening, and really I was teaching people active listening skills and how to have conversations. And so you're not sort of, I'm listening to Sue, and as I'm listening to Sue, all I'm doing is preparing my next sentence. I'm not really listening to Sue. I'm waiting for my turn to speak. And so I think it's a really interesting sort of part of this movement is actually understanding what listening is, understanding how people's opinions are formed, and then if you can sway an opinion that you think's the wrong way through a conversation, which is necessarily just asking them 3 times, break that thing down to get to how they form that opinion. It's a beautiful sort of process, I think, to get to how the status quo is and what better ways could be. And I think Vote Tony Out was just part of that thing. And a lot of people think it was really adversarial, but it was actually, if you were in it, it was actually just a really wonderful experience of, sitting with people, and a really broad group of people. I remember having lots of coffees and different talks in mornings with people. And I'd organise stickers and bags for them to give away, and it was just a really fun event. But it started like business, like Denis was saying before. I treated it as a business, and I used my marketing skills and my business skills to basically make something happen that was sustainable in the process, as opposed to like a quick hit.
So, question for you. Before you talked about being part of it, can you tell us what it is and what it looks like? Was it a structure? How did people actually know they were in it? How did the ripples happen?
What it was? Well, I think it's a movement. I always talked about creating a movement or creating a tribe. And it's just basically bringing people together who have a common sort of, I guess, mindset. And the common mindset there was, in Vote Tony Out, was really that the status quo is broken and Tony doesn't represent us. And that formed into a bigger thing when you looked at basically career politicians. Basically, they serve the party first, or then the donors, and then at some point down the line, the constituencies are there. There's we can have lots of examples of that to talk about, but it's sort of that, even just like I've been in England for the last few days and just watching what's happened in Parliament and listening to the opening speeches of Sophie and Zoe and all the different people, and it's sort of it's just pure, as opposed to someone who wants to be a career politician and get into the Liberal Party or the Labor Party because that's what I want to do for the next 20 years. This is so different. It's just a wonderful thing. And there is, like we talked about before in the sort of lead up to this, there is no parties mentioned in the constitution of any country. So it is really, go back to what it was just people representing their community working together to form the best outcome for a country or a state or whatever it was. So
Mark, tell us a little bit about leadership. I mean, community organising takes leadership. Often in Indi, we've talked about that, particularly back in the day when Kathy was, we were starting off, we used to talk about Kathy leading from the centre, being the sort of person that could bring people in around on a sort of equal basis, not leading from the front. What sort of leadership do you think that the community organising you're involved in took, and how did you go about that?
It's just really understanding egos, and sort of, I think if people want to get I think in the early part, if someone wants to be a candidate, then they're the wrong person, because they're not necessarily that it's all about them. You know, it's the me thing as opposed to us. And I have that same philosophy about leadership. It's from the middle, and you've got your sleeves rolled up, but at the same time you've got a plan, and you're talking about that plan. And some of the parts of the plan you don't talk about because people don't really get it, and they want to jump ahead. And there's a lot of steps, I think, in getting to an end game, but part of it is just really understanding where you want to go, and then just helping facilitate that. And you sort of do it one step at a time. So the first step was getting people involved. The second step was giving them an identity. I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I come back to that over and over again. And then, because the top rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is really the altruistic thing of voting a different way. And it's not really about you, it's about us. And I think for me, that you could look at nearly every electorate that won in that way, and they followed those steps. And the electorates that didn't win, or the electorates that they couldn't get up a movement at all, they basically didn't have that structure at all. So I think for me, the most powerful thing is really is understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs in many ways.
Very interesting. Oh, thank you, Mark. We'll come back to you shortly, but let's pass on to Sue to talk to us about Hughes and talk to us. I know that the notion of bringing people together and training and upskilling people is a really central one for you. So tell us about what happened in Hughes.
It's interesting to see how all these groups started, Alana, isn't it? And Kel was just saying, didn't go on Twitter. Hughes deserves better. Started with a Twitter account, a couple of people, and went off with a bang, got a lot of media, and pretty much people coalesced in behind that. And after the 2019 election, large chat group formed as a Facebook group, and a couple of groups formed out of that. There were multiple voices, a couple of bodies coming out of that who played a major role in the downfall of Craig Kelly. And it was really important in that to have multiple voices from the community. So there wasn't just one group of people, oh, we're whinging, don't like Craig Kelly. But I think it was very effective and important that there was more than one voice, community voices, and that did play an important part in contributing to the eventual media storm over historical things that had gone on in Kelly's office. None of it was new. That strength, not necessarily ideal for re-election, but I think an important point about that is that as Denis was saying before, that groups have their own identity, autonomy, pace and direction, that you can do the best you can forming a group. There's nothing you can do about other groups forming in your electorate and what direction they'll take and what their purpose and outcome will be. And so as you were saying, or what I kept on saying to people, there's no rules. There are no rules, and you can't say, oh, we're doing it the right way and you're doing it the wrong way, and you have to stop your group and join our group. So, we've all been talking about what the purposes are, what values and things like that are. I think when you're building your group, looking at what people can do. People often don't realise all the skills that they need to build a group until they're doing it. So I like starting with action, saying let's do a thing, and then people learn more about it and then want to find out more about skills about how to get organised, how to do campaigns, how to plan strategically, how to do things like fundraise or increase diversity in their groups. So I'm particularly from the perspective of, say, electorates like Hughes, and there's a lot of us around the country who haven't got the MP that we necessarily want at all, don't feel like we have good representation. There's always the hope and dream of getting a community independent representative, and then we'll have better representation. But I suggest a good place to start is right now with the MP that you've got and raising your expectations about them. And so what better thing to do than to try and build your community group and coalesce the community around campaigning with your local MP. Aim to put on 3 or 4 events per year with some speakers to talk about local issues, but also some upcoming legislation that your MP is going to be voting on. We know that there's a big list of stuff coming up: ICAC, Jenkins Review, childcare promises. We had aged care last week. We've got Robo Debt Royal Commission, Environmental Law Review, housing and things like that. How is your MP going to vote? Once you start talking about those things, people will go, oh, okay, we'd better go and visit them. And that's where they need skills in visiting and engaging with their MP. And so you can then split people up into groups and do monthly delegations, each of them to the federal MP, and find out how they're going to vote. And then report back to your community. And it doesn't have to be even necessarily in a critical way. I think if you approach the MP, so how are you going to vote on childcare reform there? Oh, really? I wonder what the rest of your constituents would think if they knew. We'll soon find out. We're off to tell them. So people can get interested then in getting those skills, but they're also building around you doing something, and then we'll follow that with how you get yourself organised, what your group looks like, and its identity and autonomy. So I would like to take this opportunity, I know Alana won't mind, to give a shout out to some community organising training that is coming up and is available. We've actually got in the group Max Smith from the Community Organising Fellowship. The list of people who have done a Community Organising Fellowship in the past however many years and who played significant roles in the 2022 election is very impressive. Max and his team will be offering an online fortnightly very entry-level community organising training, and he's going to drop the links for that in the chat now, and using some of the resources from the Common Social Change Library, which I'm chair of, and we're really pleased to be able to bring that to you and those resources and get them out to everybody. So again, also a plug for the Commons Library. And Max, if you could drop the link for that into the chat too, that would be great. You can go there and search on campaigning, fundraising, building coalitions. I mentioned before that you can't stop other groups forming in your area, and there are also existing community groups in your area as well. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to build coalitions with all the groups in your area, and building coalitions between, I think it was up to 12 groups, Kel, in Warringah was really, really important in pushing forward to Zali's campaign. There's resources on coalition.
But they were all, I think the big thing about that, we were all meeting very regularly, and
oh, that's right. And that's about,
but
building coalitions there, what to do and sort out your purpose and everything like that. So I think all of us in doing these things and aiming for community independence, we're doing that because we want better representation. And you know what, if you can work effectively so that your current MP or any potential future ones that you get, which may not be of your specific choosing, but hey, you end up with them anyway, give you better representation because you've held their feet to the fire and continue to do so. Remember, the only thing they respond to is pain or the threat of pain. And if you can get yourselves organised and get those actions going, then you're in a position to provide that.
Very interesting, Sue. Thank you. So I'm going to pick up on one of the things you said and go back to Denis and Sue, just to talk about the notion of community organising is not just about organising a group, but it's actually being able to collaborate with other community organisations or groups within your community. And so from the Voices group's perspective, how do you see that playing out? And have you seen some examples of that, Denis? You're on mute, Denis.
I like the idea of collaboration and it's sort of being an open invitation for people to participate. And thus any group or any people, members of other groups who want to participate, it's just an easy thing to be part of. And it's, in fact, I think really when there's no sense of how do you even find out, how do you get involved in politics without processes like the ones we're speaking about, it sort of feels like there's no door in there. Whereas before, you either had to be in a party or you had to be some way of influencing things with either money or influence or some other way. But the average person, myself included, I felt, well, I couldn't even see how you could get in. So in a way, I think the group has an opportunity, each group has an opportunity to promulgate that idea of it's us, it's our democracy, it's the invitation to become part of this and work together, express your views that bring your personal concerns. But I don't think one group could automatically take over the agenda of another organisation, but rather hear what people individually are saying, so that it becomes a part of a collective voice of citizens in that part of the world. So if the groups are orientated towards, for example, a federal electorate, then it's the people who are living in a particular area whose voice you'll be seeking to be represented. But those same people could be part of national organisations or state ones, whatever. They still have the personal views, and so really it's more of an invitation to hear what they feel personally, more so than what's the policy positions in other organisations, would be my suggestion. Or that's really where there's more power in a voices group if it does that.
So in Kooyong, is there a sense that there's a place for voices of Kooyong to actually relate to and collaborate with other community organising groups within the electorate?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. It's fair to say that at this present moment, Voices of Kooyong is thinking about what the next forward movement is, and our ambition is to continue to have the ability to create a space for the citizens of the community of Kooyong to come and have conversations about politics, to get educated on democracy and our constitution, our democracy, to facilitate and enable independent groups that might want to do something like a community battery, for example, to actually use the Voices of Kooyong framework to help them mobilise around particular areas of interest and then allow them the space to collaborate. So I think we've got a lot of opportunity to do just about anything we want. And that's, I think, the beauty for the model that or the pathway we've taken for Voices of Kooyong, which is that we weren't the campaign. So we're not having to flip out of campaign mode and now moving into running like an electoral office. We are now having the opportunity to think about how we represent the voices of and continue to elicit those voices and represent them back into wherever and partner with whatever groups and organisations that might want to work with us. Because I think that's the gift we've got now. It's lovely to have the framework to then shape up whatever's going to happen in the next little while. You know, we see the opportunity, a bit like Sue was saying before, we've talked about, wanting to run information sessions about big things that are coming up in the Parliament in the future, such as in the Integrity Bill, such as aged care reform, and to deep dive in and allow the community of Kooyong to get really expert in understanding what that legislation means. And to then allow for them to be well informed in communicating with Monique's office, for example, about what they want her to be doing when she returns to Canberra. And we see that as our role. And that's something that we're going to work towards.
Can I jump in, Alana, and give an example of the sort of coalition building I was talking about that provides a direct opportunity to local voices or similar groups? And that is working with other organisations on one thing that you share. So, for example, housing is a big issue across Australia right now. It's an issue at both state and federal levels, as well as local government. There's an opportunity for a local group in Hughes and also a lot of other places to run a public forum with the skills and connections that your group may have picked up in campaigning in the last election, or that somebody in your group might have anyway. Say, let's have a forum on housing. But if we just do it ourselves, it can be written off as, those wannabe teals or something like that. But let's not do that. Let's invite the local community centres along who have requests from people looking for housing. There's the St Vincent de Paul Association. There might be another couple of local churches. There's a refugee association. There's various welfare groups. There's a youth homelessness charity in our area that would definitely come to that. You round them all up and come along, and then you say to your state, your federal members, and we've got a state election coming up in New South Wales, hey, we're all getting together to have a meeting and talk, and we're inviting the community. Might be a good idea if you were there as well. We'd really like you to be and hear our voice. And when they turn up, and it's not just one group, it's a whole bunch of groups, like there's 12, there's 15 community groups mentioned here. it gives them much more of an incentive to turn up, and it's voices to everybody, and you agree beforehand, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to say, housing's a problem. We want some solutions. It's your job. We elected you. Don't pass the buck off to one another. We've got you here in the same room. Get on with it. And then we're going to go and report to all our members what you said. Then that's building power, and that's what you need. It builds your group. It builds the other groups. It builds community power against your representatives.
No, I think that's really good, Sue. I mean, that's what empowered communities are all about. And I'm going to come to Mark with a specific question in a minute, but I think it would be appropriate at this stage to say, as we're listening to all of this, one of the reasons that community groups end up falling apart is that they don't do the early work of really defining what their purpose is and knowing what they're there for. And of course, we know that having shared values is also the other thing that's really critical, because the shared values become the way that you solve the problems that we all inevitably come up and face in community groups. So the shared values guide us. But if you don't have a defined purpose, then you can be all over the place. And there's nothing that says, you know, if you're a community group that has a notion of like building this ripple effect through the whole community, then that's fantastic. If you've got a community group that has its own focus and isn't going to do that, that's fine too. But defining your purpose and knowing what holds you together and what direction you're travelling in together is such an important part of community organising. I think there's another really important part, Mark, and I want to talk to you about this. And it's this notion that, you know, in today's world, everything goes so fast that we think about what outcomes we want all the time. And we actually don't give enough time to develop good process. And it's the good process that actually ends up achieving the outcomes. But people, we're so used to reporting against outcomes that we rush to outcomes and end up failing because we don't have processes in place. So I know when I was talking to you that you had a really strong belief about process and building community first. So can you talk to us about the fact that you can't just run after the thing you want to see achieved, but you actually got to do the groundwork beforehand?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you do that. And I think the biggest part of that is actually one of my roles that I took on as part of Votonia was to really be the shepherd and sort of bring everyone back over and over. And some people, you know, if they were sort of being antagonistic, or you could see that they had a different agenda than the group, you know, I would probably usually take them out for a beer and then sort of just say, look, it's all over. You can't, you're not helping this group. I've got to let you go. Why don't you go and form your own group? And within a day or two, they've sort of either gone away or they've sort of buttoned it down. And we did that with a couple of people in McKellar who were really not quite right. And I knew, the interesting thing about Facebook, and one of those things is you actually see who people's friends are. And so I knew that one guy in particular had a couple of friends who I could talk to about him. And then I got them to have a conversation with him. And I remember talking to Anya about it, but the difference in this guy, after people had the conversation with him, he became the biggest advocate because he understood what we were trying to achieve, where a lot of people historically have done politics in a very antagonistic way. And it's all about sort of, you know, butting heads or trying to get an outcome through having a fight, which it doesn't really work. You know, it's all about, I think, understanding, like you said, what you want to achieve and then going about it in a very calm manner. And for me, a lot of that is it's a combination between Seth Godin theory, which is the outcome you want is people like us do things like this. That's how you create momentum. And the joining of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is about getting people to the outcome of, you know, voting in an altruistic way against what they've done for years, usually through a lot of apathy. But it's sort of it's building that. So you build a community, you've got momentum, and from that community, you know, a candidate pops up and they've instantly got 2 or 3% of the population of that electorate on their side. And I think for me that's an amazing thing. But if you don't have a plan, it's like a business. We could all start a business today. 76 people plus the panelists, 85 of us could become shareholders today, put in $10 each, and then we could ruin our business in about one meeting if we didn't know what we were going to achieve. So I think that's the point. The point about it is having that, not having massive egos sitting around the table, because that really doesn't work at all, and that creates the friction that you talked about before about pulling the events apart. And I sort of built that. I have a friend, Matt Haran, who's on the call, knows, called Simon Ball, and he told me very early on that people in the Liberal Party weren't really worried about you guys because all the community groups always fall apart. And after that, I just took on the role of being a shepherd and bringing people in over and over. It was like I was making a pavlova. I was just folding people in, folding it in, folding it in, folding it in to get the best outcome. Not that I'm a great pavlova chef, but that's the secret.
I think you've introduced a lovely new notion to us, Mark, and into the leadership speak too. I love that notion of the shepherd, which you know, there's so many wonderful connotations around that we don't have in our leadership speak. So thank you for that gift. Denis, I'm going to come to you because you have spent so much time talking to people in electorates who are just starting off. And so there's people on this call who all of this may well be new to them in terms of how they build anything, any sort of momentum in their communities. So tell us from your long experience now, you know, what are the keys for actually getting the start of the momentum happening, and what advice would you give communities?
I think thanks for that question, Lana. It's a really important one for me. I think one of the key things is to focus on something better, and we've already alluded to it. You don't want to. It's not to be there to get rid of somebody. It's actually to project something better for your community. Something it's a way better than just going low and trying to get rid of someone and just. You know, that's the old style of doing politics. But to actually do something like this is to inspire or to energize younger people, people who have often been so far disconnected from politics and cynical about it and feeling that it's all a waste of time. We've got to keep an eye on how we look, how each group looks when how it's behaving and what it's doing to actually bring people towards the idea. Because this is something way bigger than any one group, but for individual people in any one electorate to be feeling as if I'm joining something that's going to make a difference. I know I can work together. It's sort of setting a culture. We've mentioned the values, behavioural limits. What's sort of not a way to do things is really important. To have that sense of hope. And also a sense of making your own direction, because these groups, they can choose which way they go. They can choose. We've already mentioned a few of the ideas of, be democracy orientated, civic engagement, public speaking, electoral strategy, keeping your MP honest. All these sort of things. They're all drop down from the menu opportunities in a sense as to which way you go. But it's really important that the group spend a lot of time at that base level, the early days, agreeing on what is it that we're going to do. And as before I mentioned with an entity, if you're going to change the direction, do it in a process way that actually makes everybody satisfied with the way you've done it. If it might be a vote or like an annual meeting and reports and strategic planning, but to actually make it seem something that's that can sail well, and it's going to be something that's going to be looked after as it goes. So that's what I try to do, is to actually also to recognise that there's this thing called trepidation, and everyone when they're just starting out, of course, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? And is it all too much? Am I going to get in trouble? Or is someone going to put my name in the paper? To actually find courage as well as optimism mixed together to actually get through that. Because our own experiences with Indi, all I know is when we started, Alana, and with others, I thought, we're going to get into trouble doing this. This is sort of bigger than this is getting bigger than what we initially I thought. But it never happened. It never led to it. We're coming up with something better that wasn't going to be defined what's in the newspaper. It's actually being defined by what people in their own community knew was the right way to go. So
it's about setting your attention, isn't it?
Yeah. And there were some things, Alana, I know I can wax on a bit, but that's the key things I think are really important to get on the table early.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting listening to all of you. Often when I speak to people and have conversations about leadership, I often say we forget the word ship on the end of leader. You know, when you put SHIP on the end of anything, it actually turns it into something quite different. It turns it into an art, and it's the art of leadership. And I often think the same applies to community organising. It's not about something you can learn step by step. This is how you do it. It is an art. It's a combination of being genuinely wanting people to find a place to be included. It's the bigness of your heart. It's the goodwill. It's the altruism that you find within yourself, Mark. It's all of those things have to come together in order to be able to create a space that people want to be in, that they feel like there's a sense that I could belong there because this place, and it's about feeling, this place feels right to me. And I'll just finish off by saying, you know, many years ago, and Kathy McGowan, I think, was involved with this when she was on one of the federal government advisory committees, and John Anderson did this study into New South Wales small communities. What were the factors that made some small communities thrive and some die? And we won't be surprised at all that the outcome from that was this new word that we had to get our heads around, a sense of belongingness. It was the most important thing that generated everything else in the community. And I think that's the key to community organising. If we create a place of belongingness, then the people are going to bring their skills, their knowledge, their purpose, their want, and everything to it. And great things can happen. So I want to thank you all, because we're all part of this big story of these ripples that are actually going further and further out. And I do think, you know, we're seeing a transformation, and it's a wonderful thing that we can all be part of. So thanks for your contributions today. This has been fabulous to listen and learn from you.
Thanks, Alana.
Thanks, Alana.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Alana.
everybody.
Thank you.